in the heart of Asia, stretched a vast, harsh, and unforgiving world, the Mongolian steppe. A land without walls, without great cities, without clear borders. Here for centuries lived nomadic tribes, who depended entirely on nature. They moved with the seasons, herded horses, and survived under extreme conditions. Yet from this seemingly simple world a force would emerge that would shake global civilization. An empire that would one day stretch from the Pacific coast to the heart of Europe. And behind it all stood one name, Genghis Khan. Before the Mongols were united, this region had long been inhabited by various competing nomadic groups. One of the early powers was the Khitan people, who established the Liao dynasty in the 10th century. They controlled much of Northeast Asia, and became a major power of their time. However, it is important to understand the Khitan were not the direct ancestors of the Mongols, but rather a group related culturally and linguistically. After their fall in 1125 to the Jin dynasty, the balance of power in the steppe collapsed. The Mongolian region then fragmented into fragile alliances, including a loose confederation known as Kamag-Mongol. But this was not a state. It was merely a network of tribes, easily fractured, full of rivalry, and often at war. In such a world, true power was not determined by lineage, but by courage, cunning, and the ability to survive. Around 1162, a child named Temujin was born, the son of a minor tribal chief named Yesuge from the Borjigin clan. But his fate did not begin with glory, it began with suffering. When Temujin was still young, his father died, likely poisoned by their old enemies, the Tatar tribe. Without protection, his family was cast out by their own tribe. They were abandoned on the steppe, without food, without allies, without hope. Temujin grew up in extreme poverty. He hunted rats, ate plant roots, and struggled to survive day by day. In one of the darkest moments of his life, he was even captured by the Taichud tribe, and imprisoned with a wooden collar around his neck. But he managed to escape. It was not strength that saved him. It was determination. In his journey, Temujin formed an important bond with a young man named Jamuka. The two became Anda, sworn brothers in Mongol tradition, a bond stronger than blood. But history rarely leaves room for two great leaders to stand side by side. Temujin also formed an alliance with the leader of the Kharite tribe, Togurul, who provided him with political and military protection. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the Jin dynasty played a divide-and-rule strategy, intensifying conflicts among the steppe tribes. The Mongol world was not only harsh, it was also full of intrigue. Not long after marrying his wife, tragedy struck. She was abducted by the Merkit tribe, longtime enemies of his family. For Temujin, this was not just an attack, it was an insult. With the help of Jamuka and Togrul, he launched a retaliatory strike, and for the first time, he won. This victory did not only save his wife, it transformed Temujin from a victim into a leader. But alliances do not last forever. A fundamental difference set Temujin and Jamuka apart. Jamuka believed in the old aristocratic system, that only nobles were worthy to lead. In contrast, Temujin offered something radical, power based on merit and loyalty. Conflict became inevitable. Around 1187 the two clashed in what is known as the Battle of Dalon Buzhud. Temujin was defeated. But this defeat was not the end. It was the beginning of transformation. In the years that followed, Temujin rebuilt his strength not as an ordinary tribal chief, but as the architect of a new system. He created a revolutionary military structure, units of 10, Arban, 100, Jargun, 1,000, Mengen, 10,000 to man. This system broke tribal-based loyalties and replaced them with loyalty to the leader. He also enforced absolute discipline. Treachery and desertion were punishable by death. But the most revolutionary aspect, Temujin granted positions not based on blood, but on ability. A peasant could become a general. A slave could become a leader. This was a social revolution in the nomadic world. Supported by favorable climate conditions, fertile grasslands, and a growing horse population, Temujin's power expanded rapidly. From tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands, from a boy cast out and nearly dead on the steppe. Temujin slowly rose to become a leader, who reshaped the Mongol world order. He was not yet Genghis Khan, but the foundation of the greatest empire in human history had begun to take form, and the world had not yet realized what was coming. At the beginning of the 13th century, the Mongolian steppe was no longer merely a place of survival, it had become a battlefield for destiny. In 1201, a great Kurotai was convened by a coalition of tribes opposing Temujin. At that gathering, they elevated his main rival, Jamukha, as Gur Khan, the supreme ruler of the steppe. This was not merely a political declaration. It was a declaration of war against the future that Temujin represented. What followed was not a single battle, but a series of brutal wars among tribal coalitions, wars that would determine who had the right to unite the Mongol people. Temujin, once defeated and cast aside, now returned with something different, not just an army, but a system. After years of conflict, one by one, his enemies fell. Alliances shattered, rivals were subdued, and at last resistance ceased. In 1206, another Kurotai was convened. There, Temujin was proclaimed the leader of all Mongol people, bearing a title that would echo through history, Genghis Khan. The meaning of the title remains debated, universal ruler, or oceanic ruler, yet its impact has never been in doubt. For the first time in history, nomadic tribes that had spent centuries killing one another were united under a single banner. From this moment, the Mongol Empire was born. Unity had been achieved. Now, it was time to test that strength. Genghis Khan's first target was the Kingdom of Western Sha. In 1209, Mongol forces moved south, but they faced a major challenge. Until then, they had been masters of the open steppe, not conquerors of cities. The fortresses of Sha stood tall, and for the first time Mongol forces struggled to breach enemy defenses. Yet here, Genghis Khan's brilliance became evident. Instead of retreating, he adapted. He recruited engineers from China, studied siege techniques, even attempted to divert the Yellow River to destroy the capital. The attempt failed, even nearly becoming a disaster for his own forces. But one thing became clear. The Mongols were not just conquerors, they were fast learners. In the end, Western Sha submitted and became a vassal state. This was not merely a victory, it was a military transformation. To the south stood a great power, Jin dynasty. At first, they underestimated the Mongol, seeing them as merely a border threat. That was a fatal mistake. In 1211, Genghis Khan launched a massive invasion. His forces may have numbered only in the tens of thousands, but all were elite cavalry, the finest mounted archers in the world. In contrast, the Jin possessed a far larger population, with hundreds of thousands of troops from various regions. But numbers did not guarantee victory. Genghis Khan did not attack head-on. He divided his forces, moved swiftly, and struck from multiple directions. Communication was carried out through signals and precise coordination. On the battlefield, Mongol tactics became a nightmare. Feigned retreats to lure enemies out, rapid counterattacks in coordinated formations, extreme mobility without traditional supply lines. Two of his top generals played crucial roles: Jabei, master of rapid assault; Subutai, architect of grand strategy. Together, they did not merely win battles, they changed the very nature of warfare. After years of war, Jin defenses began to collapse. In 1215, Mongol forces laid siege to their capital, Jiangdu, the city now known as Beijing. The siege was long and brutal. Famine, destruction, and fear engulfed the city. When it finally fell, devastation was inevitable. Some of the population were massacred. Others were enslaved. But those with skilled engineers, doctors, artisans were recruited to strengthen the Mongol war machine. This was not merely conquest. It was the assimilation of enemy strength into their own. Meanwhile in the West, another event opened the door to a new world. A prince named Kuchlug fled after the defeat of his tribe and seized power in the kingdom of Karakitai. But his rule was harsh, especially toward the Muslim population. When Mongol forces arrived, under Jabei's command, many cities instead opened their gates. Kuchlug was defeated and executed. With this victory, the borders of the Mongol Empire now touched the Islamic world. Interestingly, Genghis Khan did not yet intend to conquer everything. He sent a trade caravan and diplomatic envoys to a great western kingdom of Khwarezmia, ruled by Muhammad II of Khwarezmia. The goal was simple: trade and peaceful relations, but the decision made by the Shah would become one of the greatest mistakes in human history. In the border city of Otrar, everything changed. The local governor, Inalchuk, accused the caravan of being spies. Without strong evidence, he arrested and executed them. Genghis Khan did not retaliate immediately. He chose diplomacy. He sent 3 envoys to Shah Muhammad II, but the response he received was an insult. One envoy was beheaded. The other 2 were humiliated. In steppe culture, this was not merely a violation. It was a declaration of war. In 1219, the war began. The Mongol forces, ranging from tens of thousands to over 100,000 elite cavalry, moved in multiple directions at once. Not a single wave, but a storm from every direction. In contrast, Khwarezmia possessed vast resources, but was fragmented and uncoordinated. The Shah's fatal mistake was dispersing his forces across many cities, allowing the Mongols to destroy them one by one. The first city targeted was Otrar, where it all began. Led by Genghis Khan's sons, Chagatai and Ogedei, the siege lasted for months. Eventually, the city fell. Its governor was executed brutally, according to some sources in a horrifying manner. But more importantly, the message was clear: no betrayal would go unanswered. The next move revealed Mongol military brilliance. Instead of following conventional routes, Genghis Khan led his army across the Kizilkum Desert, a path considered impossible. When they appeared at the city of Bukhara, the enemy was unprepared. The city fell quickly. According to Persian chronicles, Genghis Khan even stood in the main mosque and declared, "I am the punishment of God." Terror had now become a weapon. From Bukhara, Mongol forces advanced toward the center of power, Samarkand. The city had strong defenses, had a large garrison. But once again, Mongol strategy determined the outcome. Prisoners were used to weaken defenses. Feigned retreats lured forces out. Rapid assaults destroyed them outside the walls. In 1220, Samarkand fell. Some of the population were massacred. Others were enslaved. And skilled individuals, engineers, artisans, were recruited. The Khwarezmian Empire began collapsing from within. As cities fell, one by one, Shah Muhammad II fled. He continued moving relentlessly, pursued by Mongol forces, until finally he died alone on a remote island in the Caspian Sea. A silent end for a great ruler. Meanwhile, Genghis Khan's youngest son, Tolui, led campaigns into Persian territories. Major cities such as Merv and Nishapur were destroyed. In many accounts, these events are described as some of the most devastating massacres in history. This was not merely war. It was the systematic destruction of a civilization. But it was not over yet. The Shah's son, Jalal ad-Din, gathered the remaining forces and fought back. At the Battle of Parwan, 1221, he managed to defeat a Mongol force, a rare victory. However, internal conflicts weakened him. When Genghis Khan himself intervened, Jalal ad-Din was ultimately defeated and fled to India, leaping into the Indus River in a dramatic escape. While Genghis Khan returned east, two of his generals continued the expedition, Subutai and Jabay. They advanced into the Caucasus, defeating alliances of local tribes, and continued into the lands of the Rus. There they faced a large coalition. In 1223, a major battle took place, the Battle of the Kauka River. Using feigned retreat tactics, the Mongols lured their enemies far from position, then completely destroyed them. This was not a full invasion, it was a reconnaissance in force, a test, before a greater storm would come. In just a few years, the Mongol Empire had destroyed one of the greatest powers in the world. Cities fell, kingdoms collapsed, and global trade routes were forever changed. But this was only the beginning, for the Mongol storm had not yet reached its peak, and in the West, Europe still did not realize that they were the next target. In 1226, in his advancing age, Genghis Khan once again led the Mongol army into war. His target was a kingdom that had previously submitted but had begun to show signs of defiance, Western Shah. Their refusal to support the Mongol campaign against Khwarezmia was not the only reason. For Genghis Khan, this act reflected a dangerous potential rebellion against the stability of the empire. This invasion was not merely expansion. It was a punitive expedition. Mongol forces advanced, systematically destroying city after city. As in previous campaigns, they employed intensive sieges, total destruction of resisting cities, terror as a psychological weapon. Cities that surrendered early were sometimes spared, but those that resisted were often annihilated. Amid this campaign, Genghis Khan's condition began to decline. In 1227, during the final siege against Western Shah, Genghis Khan died. The exact cause of his death has never been definitively known. Some sources suggest injuries from a fall from his horse, wounds sustained in battle, or illness worsened by age. However, in modern scholarship, none of these theories can be confirmed with certainty. To maintain stability within the army and the empire, his death was likely kept secret for a time. The Mongol forces continued the campaign, and not long after, Western Shah was completely destroyed. The Tongat civilization nearly vanished from history. According to Mongol tradition, the location of Genghis Khan's tomb was kept secret. To this day, his final resting place remains one of history's greatest mysteries. Before his death, Genghis Khan had designated his successor, his third son, Ögedei. However, according to Mongol tradition, this decision had to be ratified through a Kurultai, a grand assembly of Mongol elites. In 1229, Ogedei was officially proclaimed Great Khan. Under his leadership, the empire underwent major changes. If Genghis Khan was the conqueror, then Ogedei was the administrator. He began building the empire's administrative foundations, strengthening the tax system, developing the communication network, YAM system, establishing a new capital at Karakorum. Under his rule, the Mongol Empire transformed from a war machine into an organized global power. One of Ogedei's main targets was the Mongols' old enemy, Jin dynasty. But this time, the Mongols did not act alone. They formed a strategic alliance with the southern Song dynasty, a longtime enemy of the Jin. The war lasted fiercely for several years, but in 1234 the Jin dynasty finally collapsed completely. With its fall, northern China came under Mongol control. Mongol expansion also reached the Korean peninsula against the kingdom of Goryeo. Unlike other regions, the conquest of Korea was not a swift victory. Resistance lasted for nearly 3 decades. The Goryeo government even moved its capital to Ganhwa Island to avoid direct Mongol attacks. Wave after wave of assaults continued, until Goryeo finally submitted, but with a degree of autonomy and the obligation to pay tribute. After securing East Asia, Mongol expansion turned westward once again. This campaign was led by Batu Khan, political leader, Subutai, military genius. In 1236 they began attacking the regions of Volga Bulgaria, the Rus lands. Major cities such as Ryazan, Vladimir, and Kiev fell one by one. In 1240, Kiev, one of the key centers of the Slavic world, was destroyed. This victory laid the foundation for Mongol rule in the Russian territories, which would later be known as the Golden Horde. In 1241, Mongol forces continued their expansion into Central Europe. They launched 2 major simultaneous offensives into Poland and Hungary. At the Battle of Legnica, Mongol forces defeated an European coalition. Shortly after, at the Battle of Mohi, they crushed the Hungarian army with highly coordinated strategy. Europe was unprepared to face Mongol mobility, feigned retreat tactics, and cross-battlefield coordination. These victories opened the path toward West Europe. At the height of their success, important news arrived from the east. Ogedei had died in 1241. According to Mongol political tradition, elite leaders had to return to decide the successor. But the Mongol withdrawal from Europe was not solely due to this. Other factors also played a role. The need for central political stability, logistical challenges in Europe, and the empire's strategic priorities. As a result, Mongol expansion into Western Europe never materialized. By the mid-13th century, internal conflicts among the descendants of Genghis Khan began to emerge, particularly in the struggle for central power. One of the most significant conflicts was the civil war involving the lineage of Tolui. From this long process eventually emerged several relatively independent powers. The power in China, which later developed into the Yuan dynasty under Kublai Khan, the Central Asian region controlled by the Chagatai Khanate, the Persian and Middle Eastern region controlled by the Ilkhanate under Hulagu Khan, the Russian and Eurasian steppe region controlled by the Golden Horde under Batu Khan. One of the greatest impacts of Mongol rule was the creation of a period known as the Pax Mongolica. Under these conditions, vast territories from Asia to Europe were under relatively stable political control, allowing trade to flourish. Ancient trade routes such as the Silk Road were not only reactivated but also became safer than before. At least in regions under Mongol control, merchants from across the world could now travel across continents. However, behind this progress lay a darker side that cannot be ignored. Mongol expansion caused massive destruction across many regions. Many cities were destroyed, and populations declined significantly due to war and forced displacement. Furthermore, the vast trade networks also accelerated the spread of disease. One of the most well-known was the pandemic known as the Black Death. This plague spread through Eurasian trade routes and, in the 14th century, devastated populations in many regions, especially in Europe. The story of Genghis Khan is one of the most remarkable transformations in human history. From a child, raised in hardship, on the steppe, he built a force that reshaped the world. The empire he founded did not only conquer lands, it also connected civilizations. His legacy is a paradox: destruction and connection, violence and innovation, fragmentation and early globalization. And to this day, the name Genghis Khan remains a symbol of power, strategy, and profound change in world history.